It is Friday, February 24th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone. First up, I should mention, I am definitely sick, not doing that great. Well, I mean, I'm fine, but like it's a cold, so I've noticed that if I talk a lot, I tend to get very stuffy and have a shortness of breath. So, you know, it's something where I'm not feeling terrible, but the video might not sound that good. So we might get a little bit off the rails, but bear with me because we have some stories to go over in the world of PlayStation. So first up, as always, our PS Plus reminder. The February PS Plus Essential Games are still live on PSN, so claim those, get that done. Also, we do know what the March games are going to be, but we'll talk about that later for the State of Play news story. First, though, let's move into, I guess, what would still be a PS Plus news story, and that is the new classic titles on Premium, which is Harvest Moon, Wild Arms 2, and Legend of Dragoon. Those last two do have trophies. I am very happy to report that. It does seem like Sony is being more diligent with making sure that games that they, published, they're adding trophies to those titles. So Legend of Dragoon has them. That's great. Good reason to go back and play that or play it for the first time. It's a classic Japan studio title that I recommend anybody go back and try. But there's a caveat, so at least for that game, it's got some issues. I think Wild Arms 2 also has issues, but Legend of Dragoon has like audio issues cutting in and out, and there's like if you use magic in the game, it can soft lock, and magic's a big part of the game, so you might want to hold off. As of right now, there's an SIE employee on psnprofiles.com. They appear to be a genuine employee, and they are fielding these bug reports for all these classic titles and sending them over to the appropriate team at PlayStation, so they should be made aware of these issues, and that's good. So probably just gonna have to wait for these to be sorted out with a patch, but this is also a good time to remind people that I know we often talk about these games under the presumption that you have to be subscribed to Premium to play them. That's not true. So there's I think 4 games right now that for some reason you have to subscribe to Premium. You can't buy them a la carte, and I think that's just purely because of a publisher thing, right? So they're all third-party games. It's Mr. Driller, Tekken 2, Ridge Racer 2, and the first Resident Evil Director's Cut. So those games you have to subscribe, but most of them you can buy a la carte, including Legend of Dragoon. And this is also where I would remind people that, if you buy these games on PS4, PS5, that's fine, but you won't be granted the PS3, PS1 Classic. So if you do have a PS3, it might be worth, lugging out, powering it up, buying the game there. You're going to be granted that game for free on PS4, PS5, and sometimes these games are cheaper on that PSN store. So Legend of Dragoon is $5.99 on the PS3 PlayStation Store. It's $10 on PS4, PS5. So just something to always remember about these classic games. Anyway, moving on to our next story. As most people know, PS5 can play the vast majority of PS4 titles via backwards compatibility, but there is 6 PS4 games that do not work at all, and there's also about 100 titles that, when played on PS5, you can do it, but they may exhibit graphical artifacts or graphical abnormalities. And probably one of the most well-known titles in there that we looked at in a separate video was Assassin's Creed Syndicate. So that's a pretty well-known IP. I'm sure a lot of people have that game, or they tried playing it on PS5 and they may have encountered these crazy, light flickering issues and broken shadows. The game is more or less unplayable on PS5 because it's so visually distracting. But it turns out it finally got that patch. It would be a patch for just strictly the PS4 version, so it's not a native PS5 game, but when played via backwards compatibility, the game is totally fine now. There's no major issues, so that's good to see. This probably is one of the last PS4 games that is going to be fixed in this manner, because as PS4 gets older and older, and a lot of these developers, distance themselves away from these titles that they released on PS4, which again, there's about 100 titles that, may have these problems. We've seen them before, right? Or we've documented it on video. The likelihood of these games getting patched becomes lower and lower, right? So this was a pretty well-known title that finally got fixed. If any more get fixed, we'll, of course, talk about it here. Next up, as I'm sure a lot of you know, PlayStation VR2 finally came out, and, pretty big deal, ushering in a new generation of virtual reality on PlayStation hardware, so big stuff. And yesterday we did our video covering the, unboxing, setup, walkthrough. just a little bit of gameplay. Of course, it's going to take me a bit as one person to work through a lot of those launch games because there is a ton. In fact, it seems like Sony is announcing more and more games coming to PSVR2. So recently we had a blog post right before launch confirming more day one titles, but also more things coming later. So at least for those titles that are coming later, that would be Another Fisherman's Tale. That game is coming later this year. Then there's Gorn, that's coming March 16th. So we knew about this game, but now it's got a confirmed date. Still no idea if there's a free upgrade for this one, but that should be coming fairly soon. Knock Bow plus Arrow is coming in March. So again, something coming right around the corner. There's just a ton of software. Then there's Hellsweeper VR. That one is labeled as coming later this year, alongside Sushi Ben, another game coming later this year. Now, since the headset is finally out, we can finally pin down exactly how many launch games there were. I'm counting 48, which is nuts. That is so many games. And it goes back to what I said before. Like, you know, we were at a point where the launch lineup to me, and I think for many, seemed lackluster, but it only took like 2 blog posts to where they went from like 20 games to now nearly 50. So it's insane. There's a lot there. Not just all this stuff from PCVR and MetaQuest, which again, I think is not nearly as big of a deal here, but you know, you've got so much of that stuff. You've got free upgrades. You've got these really big 2D games getting VR modes, which are not, you know, not these small little offshoot things. It's all of RE Village, all of Gran Turismo 7, and they're really good. So, it's nice to see that PSVR 2 is hitting the ground running, I think, at least in terms of software support, because there's just been so many game announcements. We also had an upload on Sunday, or no, what was it? Monday I did it, where there's about 100 plus titles in development, and that video was outdated pretty much the second I published it because there's just more and more being announced. So it seems like Sony has some very good tools in place for a lot of these PCVR and MetaQuest devs to bring their games over, which I'm sure many would fully encourage. Now, one very big VR announcement recently was Resident Evil 4. That game we knew was getting some kind of VR content. That's how it was labeled in that state of play from last year. Well, recently, the official Japanese Twitter account sent out a new tweet confirming that the content is going to be free post-launch support, and they're calling it a VR mode. Now, that doesn't, you know, say outright that it's the full game, but considering we've had RE7 and RE Village in the full game front to back in VR, I would hope that this means it's all of Resident Evil 4. That would be, you know, that would be fantastic for those that want to play it. I can't do it. I'm going to try Village. Probably not going to go over well, but just bear in mind that that's going to be free post-launch DLC. And for Village, it's worth mentioning if you are planning on getting it or you're trying to play the VR mode, that's a separate download on PSN. It's not considered a patch for the game like Gran Turismo 7, so just keep that in mind. All right, let's talk about this recent state of play that Sony aired just yesterday. And, you know, we kind of already knew what we were getting even before Sony confirmed it when, you know, Jeff Grubb mentioned during one of his recent podcasts that, you know, oh, we're getting a low-key state of play. And then the big stuff, which I was expecting around the E3 timeframe, and he then corroborated that's when we're getting a big showcase is, you know, before E3, but this was going to be a small show. And then Sony outlined exactly what was going to be in this state of play, which was a look at Suicide Squad, third-party stuff, PSVR 2 games. Now, it's good that they do that, but that is exactly what was in the show, so nothing crazy, but we'll still do a quick recap here of everything in that state of play. So first off was the Foglands coming to PSVR 2. This is a new game, or at least I'm pretty sure it's a new game announcement for PSVR 2, I should say, because the next game is Green Hell VR. This one was already announced. We knew about it before. It was in my trailer lineup thing for PSVR 2. But after this was Synapse. This is a new game for sure. It's coming exclusively to PSVR 2, so interesting. It's from the developer Endreams. They've done a few things in the VR space lately, and really going far back, they were PlayStation Home content, a content studio making like cosmetics and things. But after that was Journey to the Foundation, an adaptation, a VR adaptation, I should say. That's coming autumn 2023. And then Before Your Eyes, which this is another game game that we knew was coming March 10th for PSVR2. A very unique title, though. You only play it with your head movements and blinking your eyes, so pretty cool. But after that was Destiny 2 Lightfall, a new trailer for that. It's launching next week, so they're just doing promotion stuff there. And then Chia, this is coming March 21st, PS4, PS5. We have a release date alongside this game launching, or we have the confirmation that it's launching on PlayStation Plus Extra and Premium. And this is where Sony confirms the March lineup for PS Plus Essentials. So it's Battlefield 2048, PS4, PS5, Minecraft Dungeons for PS4, and Code Vein on PS4. So we already have the March lineup, and they also show the promo graphic for PS Plus Extra, which it's only the promo graphic. This never includes everything, but what we can see is Uncharted: The Legacy of Thieves Collection, Ghostwire Tokyo, Chia, like we just said, Immortal Phoenix Rising, and Rainbow Six Extraction, which that alone already sounds pretty good, but you know, again, those promo graphics do not include the entire lineup, so there should be more. After that, we finally saw Humanity again. This game we saw a long time ago. Now it's got a release window, May 2023, coming to PS4, PSVR, and PS5 and PSVR2. There's a limited time demo out now on PSN and Steam. Then, Goodbye Volcano High. This game finally has a release date, June 15th for PS4, PS5. After that is Naruto Boruto Ninja Storm Connections. That's coming 2023. Baldur's Gate 3, August 31st, PS5. That is actually a pretty big deal, or at least it seems to me like that's a big deal. I'm not seeing many people talk about that one, but coming to PS5, day and date with PC, so that's pretty nutty. After that is Wayfinder. This is coming to PS4, PS5, with a beta coming February 28th. Then we get a new trailer for Street Fighter 6 showing Zangief, Lily, and Cammy. Game's coming June 2nd. Resident Evil 4, the Mercenaries mode was shown off, was shown off here. It's going to be free DLC post-launch, and there's a special demo coming soon. That was the announcement. And then there's the Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, kind of an extended look, so it was like 15 minutes long looking at this game, but that's coming May 26th. So that's basically it. Nothing crazy, right? Not really going to set the world on fire with that state of play, especially when, I mean, it was a fairly long state of play as far as these shows go, so 40 minutes long, but when 15 minutes is Suicide Squad, which, I mean, I'm feeling very lukewarm on that game, and I think a lot of people are. But yeah, it was all right. But I'll always say this: I am fine with kind of whatever state of plays. Not only do I like watching games, I don't really care. I like seeing this stuff. But number two, it's good to always have something pop up that gives us a collection of trailers and news updates for games coming in the next 6 to 12 months. But with state of plays, it's always something where we've had big shows, right? So because of that, even when Sony outlines what's going to be in those shows, you can still read it a certain way and think, oh, okay, PSVR2 games. Does that mean Half-Life Alyx? Oh, third-party stuff. Well, that can be anything, big or small. So even when they come out and say no first party, it doesn't matter. You can still have your imagination run a bit wild. But going back to, again, Jeff Grubb's statements from a few weeks ago during Game Mess Decides, and he also did a recent show only a few hours ago even, where he had brought up this point about this upcoming showcase that he's hearing about, which is coming before E3 is what he calls it. Now, I think it's going to be closer to E3, but he mentioned something, he says something I've been saying on this show for a while now, which is Sony is due to talk about a lot of games because they have to start explaining and showing off this sort of back half of PS5's life, or rather, he calls it a phase 2, but essentially a new wave of games, because yes, the big critique right now for PlayStation Studios is we only have Spider-Man 2, Wolverine, a lot of rumors, obviously, nothing confirmed. We know there's live service titles. We have an idea of what some games are, but that's basically it. So Sony has to eventually start explaining their late 2023, but also 24, 5, possibly 6 timeline here. So we should be seeing a lot of game announcements fairly soon, and you can expect them to happen at a PlayStation Showcase, which seems like we'll only have to wait a few months to eventually get that. Now, it's also worth noting that Sony does have a different formula with how they talk about games, right? So we might get some game announcements, teasers, trailers, but then they'll go radio silent for a bit. So it really depends on the timeline of each individual game. But at least for PS5 so far, it's been a matter of, hey, here's a game announcement. Then we won't talk about it for nearly 2 years, and then once it's 3-4 months out, then they'll start talking about it more. Sony no longer does the sort of 3-year news cycle where we get 5, 6 something trailers and all these interviews right up until the game comes out. Now it's a matter of only a few months before it's out. That's when they'll start the proper news cycle, and we'll maybe get 2 more trailers, if that. But that's just something to keep in mind as we start navigating the sort of second half of PlayStation 5's life. Moving on to our next story, we have an update on the Ballistic Moon possible acquisition. I guess rumor based on the general definition, but it kind of seems more like speculation to me, where if you remember from the last time that we talked about this, it was a PlayStation job listing where there was a bunch of first-party studios on there, and Ballistic Moon was kind of wedged in between all those, which led some to speculate that, hey, maybe this is a mistake because they acquired Ballistic Moon, and it was like Blue Point Games where they inadvertently revealed it before they're ready to talk about it, right? So, that was the speculation, but that news story was primarily about how Sony officially acknowledged their existence, or rather their partnership with them, because we do know very confidently that they're working on a PS5 and PC game called Project Bates. It's a horror title, and we know that at the bare minimum they're a second-party relationship currently. But recently there was, Colin Moriarty of Sacred Symbols had brought up the PitchBook.com listing for Blue Point Games. Now, PitchBook.com is like an aggregate business site where it just catalogs a bunch of information for various businesses, and the listing for Ballistic Moon showed that it was something where it was falling under merger and acquisition, where it was recently merged, and the parent company was Sony. The problem with this listing, though, is that due to the nature of the site, it is something where they're trying to field the information from submissions and things like that. So it seems like this profile was recently updated around the time that news story broke out, right? So like when I talked about it, when a few other places were bringing it up, so it must have been something where that's how it was changed on that site. But if you visit the PitchBook listing now, it does show that it's considered rumor and speculation, and ownership status is still privately held. So that's not really an indicator that they were actually acquired. So just if you saw that they were acquired, or if you saw the story, like, here's the actual update. If you revisit that page, this is not a reliable source. But as I mentioned during that job listing news story, to humor the speculation, it would not surprise me, because that would kind of fall under Sony's fairly new MO for their merger and acquisition activity, which is, still primarily about acquiring the talent, not the IP. They still have not done that where they're buying a developer just because of the games they own, or a publisher for all the IP they can leverage and, make exclusive. They still have not done it like that, whether it's a long-standing partner or more recently fairly new studios, or in the case of Bungie where they are established but they want the talent for their own live service games. That's how they've been doing it. And in the context of, let's say, fairly new studios, or even like Firesprite's still a new studio in that they only have the persistence that they shipped. They've worked with Sony on Astrobot games, but it's more a matter of Sony very likely identifying a good work culture, knowing the people that work there, understanding that they've got a lot of history under their belts, right? The long-standing careers that these people have, and understanding that if they can properly fit within the PlayStation Studios portfolio, and if we give them funding, if we give them these resources, will they adapt properly to the PlayStation family? The valuations are not high, so it's a very strategic play on Sony's part, where they're understanding that the talent is very valuable and affordable in that case, instead of, say, spending a boatload of money securing a very valuable team and IP that you can leverage down the road. That's just not what Sony's been doing right now. So Ballistic Moon would fit that criteria right now, but we just don't have the evidence just yet. Anyway, moving on to our next story. This one definitely is a rumor, this time coming from VGC, their new podcast called VGC, a Video Game Podcast, hosted by Jordan Midler and also with Andy Robinson. Recently on their first episode, they had brought up what they've been hearing about for Konami's plans this upcoming E3, where it seems like they're going to have a fairly large presence to finally showcase a new Castlevania and the rumored MGS3 remake by Virtuos, which this kind of all goes back to a report which again was from VGC, but at the time it was from a few other places as well, which at the time it was 3 games, right? Or 3 franchises: Silent Hill, Castlevania, Metal Gear Solid. Since then, we've seen that Silent Hill finally had its full blowout, a range of titles announced. The MGS rumor evolved into an MGS3 remake by Virtuos, and then Castlevania would be the most unclear as of right now. We don't really know to what extent that is going to look like, how many games, what the game is going to be, what kind of Castlevania it's going to end up looking like. But having said that, they are talking about how Konami seems to be ready to finally showcase these 2 games at this upcoming E3, and at least in the context of Metal Gear Solid, they want to do this 3rd remake, right? And then depending on how that goes, that might be a test bed for possibly exploring 2 and 1 further, maybe outside of just a simple remaster. Maybe they would fund a full-blown remake, but it more or less it's unclear right now as to what exactly they want to do with those games. Either way, much like Silent Hill, the reason why we followed that story for such a long time is because Sony lately has been, getting very cozy with a lot of publishers. And we saw that turned into a timed exclusivity agreement for Silent Hill 2. So, big titles or rather big IP like Castlevania and Metal Gear Solid, I think Sony is more than likely, talking to them, and we'll see what happens in terms of some kind of agreement, marketing rights. I mean, who knows to what extent a deal might look like, but, when we're talking about PlayStation, those titles, I think they would want to get involved. All right, it is time for our latest update on the Microsoft acquisition of Activision Blizzard and King Digital Entertainment. So it was a very busy week. First and foremost, the Microsoft Vice Chairman and President Brad Smith confirmed in the early morning on Twitter that the 10-year agreement with Nintendo has been signed. It's worth noting that the language used here implied Xbox games in general, and not strictly Call of Duty, but it's since been clarified that the agreement was only for Call of Duty to ship on Nintendo platforms. And that was on February 21st, which was the same day as the planned court date with the European commissioners to discuss the deal and, for Microsoft to make their case, and that did happen. So Sony was there alongside other related third parties to speak on the deal, but that was entirely closed off to the media, so we have no idea how that played out, who said what, or what was even said at all. But what we do know is Microsoft held a press briefing in a hotel that was close to the EU hearing, discussing the current situation with the ABK deal so far. Now, Microsoft's Brad Smith explains during this briefing that they can't talk about what was said, but they do start with announcing a new 10-year agreement with NVIDIA as well. They'll make all Xbox PC games available on GeForce Now, including Activision Blizzard titles and Call of Duty, following the acquisition. Smith then goes on to reference a chart which shows PlayStation's market share in Europe compared to Xbox, where it's an 80-20 split, and he discusses it on a global scale as well, where Sony's more, it's more of a 70-30 split. He even says Japan, it's like 96-4 or something like that, but He then goes on to explain that they're open to working with regulators and talks about how the recent Nintendo and NVIDIA deals means the Call of Duty franchise is now going to reach 150 million more devices. Smith then holds up an envelope which apparently contained the actual paperwork for the agreement Sony has yet to sign, saying he's ready whenever they are. After this, they open up the briefing to a Q&A, where Smith touches on the topic of, say, divesting Call of Duty, and his response was, and I quote, "We don't think it's feasible or realistic to think one game or one slice can be carved out from the rest." He then explains UK regulators, in his view, did not totally shut down the idea of behavioral remedies instead of structural ones, which would include divesting parts of the business. And that's basically it. There's not much more that was said during that briefing, but GamesIndustry.biz does report that they do have a source claiming that Sony and Microsoft are apparently not close to a deal at all as of February 21st. You know, I really wish I could just be a fly on the wall to hear the negotiations between these two companies, because you have to figure it's a lot of Microsoft offering this and that and the other, and then Sony going no, 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 because they do not want the deal to go through, period. So there may not be much negotiations actually going on unless Sony is making counter offers that Microsoft is unwilling to accept, because as of right now, the most widely accepted sort of analysis on Microsoft's process here is that they're willing to do a lot to get the deal to go through, but that's not entirely true, because as we saw with the CMA's provisional findings, where one of their initial remedies is, you know, hey, divest Call of Duty, divest Activision, and at the time I said, like, yeah, they're not going to do that because they're losing very obvious upsides to the deal that they themselves initiated, right? That's why they're doing this. And now we see that confirmed, where Brad Smith says that's not realistic. Oh, it's not realistic because they then they don't want to do the acquisition if they're not getting Call of Duty, if they're not going to get Activision, right? So they could be unwilling to work with what Sony is asking for if Sony is, say, playing hardball and going, okay, we'll, sign up for this deal. We'll agree to it if we also get all the Activision titles, not just Call of Duty. Maybe they're being really aggressive. Give us back the Bethesda stuff. Give us all the Xbox first-party stuff. Maybe give us 20 years instead of 10, right? I know you have to put a number on it, but make it 20. I mean, they could be doing that. And Microsoft could be incredibly unreceptive to those offers, right? There still has to be the upsides to this deal long term, because that is the one thing they're willing to do. They are willing to wait. So for as much as they can say in the here and now that all these good things are going to happen, and they certainly can happen, improving the labor conditions, the games going on Game Pass and having a lower barrier of entry, reaching more customers, those are all good things. They can happen, but there is a long-term roadmap for Microsoft to eventually make more money. If they can't do that, then they don't want to do the deal in the first place. Hopefully we'll find out fairly soon what the next step is in the process, but the hearing did take place. Sony was there. I'm sure they're not going to move the needle very much on getting them to approve of it, but again, even if Sony did approve, they might still face very tough regulation from all these government bodies. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter, and if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very easy. You can follow the link down below. Supporting this channel, a number of ways can get you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the stories that I wanted to talk about to you all from this past week, and recently we had two videos, so 100 plus PSVR2 games in 14 minutes, so that's a good way to get kind of a bird's eye view of a lot of PSVR2 content with release dates, windows, things like that. And then yesterday was our PSVR2 unboxing, setup, walkthrough, a general tour of the headset. So that's a great way to get started if you don't have one just yet and want to, just check out all the little odds and ends about that thing. But of course, we'll be doing more PSVR2 coverage on a rolling basis as I work through a lot of launch titles, and so you'll be seeing more of that, but otherwise, that's pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.